very much reflects the architectural development. Started in England, just like many architectural histories of the last 2 centuries, started with the arts and crafts as an important moment in the development of modern architecture. Then it moved to the mainland, to France, parts of Germany, and Belgium, where Art Nouveau flourished in the literal and metaphorical sense. And then it moved to Germany, to the south, where you can see that functionalism in the 1920s and 30s became extremely important. So it's a kind of wave moving over Europe, showing, according to me, that there is this relation between industrialization, urbanization, and architectural development, which is because city is the main important field for architects, and it's also the main generator of architectural culture. There are, of course, interesting architects in remote villages and interesting buildings in the middle of nowhere, but the core of the architecture is in cities, and bigger cities. This is just to show that it's everywhere in Europe. Don't talk too much about it. And in the generator for social housing, of course, this large mass of new city dwellers need to be accommodated, and many European countries develop these huge programs of social housing, both in Western Europe and in what became after the Second World War, Eastern Europe, where there's a very similar attitude and approach. This growth of population, this enormous increase also led to the creation of a whole cultural and social infrastructure of schools, for instance. This is one of my favorite examples. This is a school building in Greece in the 1930s, where a progressive government in that period declared that they want to build more than 2,000 schools throughout Greece. Can you imagine in a period of 10 years' time, they just transformed the whole educational infrastructure of the country. There's also an interesting pattern in that sense, that you can see that in many places they have this primary and secondary education starting in the 1920s and 30s and continuing with the growth of population. And then from the 1940s and 50s on, you also see an enormous increase in the number of university complexes which were built. As generations got, younger generations got slightly older, new generations became richer than the previous ones. They were able to send their kids to university, and this has led to this whole stream of university buildings, of which this particular building is maybe also an example. The same is true that throughout this century you see this whole network of public buildings, like for instance city halls appearing everywhere. This is 4 with nice towers, libraries, and all kind of, let's say, more or less public facilities, including, for instance, this supermarket in Sweden, which is designed by what was at that time the biggest architectural office of Sweden, which was only working for this consumer shops and all the other cooperative projects of this organization, which was basically a kind of members-only club. So only if you were a member you were allowed to buy the supermarket, and all those members had a share in the company, and they had the whole food chain for themselves. So they had slaughterhouses, factories, everything to produce food which would be sold for low price. Consume supermarkets. And it's part, of course, of this cultural, let's say, environment which was created in Sweden from the 1930s and 40s onwards, of which the Kulturhuset of Peter Celsing in Stockholm is just one example. But similarly, even in less democratic situations like Ceausescu's Romania, you can see that there was a similar achievements when it comes to public architecture. I'm telling you this because I wrote a book about the history of European architecture since 1890, which tells this story of, let's say, the public role of architecture in Europe, and it looks like it's a very neutral history. It excludes all the warfare which has been taking place during this century, and it hardly mentions the let's say, the dark side of many European countries. sometimes, because you can see that whether it was democratic or dictatorial, there was always this belief that architecture was a way to give shape to society, as it was seen as a way of nation building. And sometimes it was just through forced labor, like here is Moscow Canal, built during the height of Stalin terror, which is described in this beautiful book, which is really chilling to read. But this canal has been made mainly by forced labor. At the same time, you can see that even in this period of relatively limited freedom in Central and Eastern Europe, they were making the most exciting buildings. Here are some examples from Central and Eastern Europe of things which I think deserve more attention than they usually get. And it continues even today in several ways, but you can see that both in Central and Western Europe there is this ongoing process of building a cultural infrastructure. I describe this in this book, European Architecture since 1890, which when I was writing it, the crisis started. When I was completing it, I realized that it was not just a chapter in ongoing history, it may be the end of this period. And 1 year later I wrote this book, which was for me kind of affirmation of the feeling I had already when I was writing this. To conclude, this is something which I recently found, which is a map of the world's most expensive buildings. Here as well. And I know it's not telling everything, it's not just who's going to make the most expensive buildings, but I think, again, this is showing a kind of shift. Because if you look at the map on top, you see there are 3 buildings in the US. That's the listing one, I think. There's one spot's on the wrong way. There's one in the UK, and the rest is in Asia. It shows, again, the shift. Because I think if you would have made the same map 20 years earlier, I'm pretty sure that maybe with the exception of 1 or 2 buildings, all of them would have been in the West, and mainly in the US. And if you look at the kind of buildings here, they're either, most of them are banks, or casinos, or stadiums. And there is this one exceptional residence in India, which I think they somehow miscalculated the cost because it's not that big, and maybe the property value increases over time, but the building itself cannot be as expensive to be the numbers. But it doesn't matter, it's quite telling there. And here you see also the shift, because you have the Wembley Stadium and the Yankee Stadium, and then 3 casinos in the US. There are no public buildings, unless you want to call the stadium, which is a highly commercial enterprise, if you want to call it a public building. And it shows 2 ways the shift in architecture, the shift from the west to the east, and also in a way the shift from public to a more private orientation. And of course you can be very pessimistic, and when I was making this book there was this sense of pessimism which was hard to escape, but at the same time that's returning to what Miguel was saying in the beginning. You can feel that it's an indication of a fundamental shift which is taking place. And if you are nostalgic and you want to keep this idea of architecture as this very social practice of doing good for society, etc., you can feel very disappointed about this age. But if you look at it from a wider perspective, you can see that this particular definition of architecture only existed for 200 years. I'm an historian, so 200 years is nothing. Of course, for any human being it's a lot, but in the course of time it's just nothing. So we might all be deceived by this extreme period in which architecture seemed to be extremely important and extremely relevant for society. But before 1800, it was nowhere like that. And maybe after 2000, it is decreasingly so for the future. Which means, and that's maybe the most optimistic message, that you are really at the threshold of a new era, where you can redefine architecture and growth. So don't look back too much. You don't look back anyway, because we're postmodernist. History is just one big reservoir of things that we can use currently. Just look forward and think of this potential, but try to get rid of this maybe already obsolete definition of architecture as we know it before. Thank you.